There's a chance that bad things are going to happen in your country, and I believe in being geographically diversified to protect against that. But some people say there's nowhere to run. The reality is that empires rise and fall. And if you want to protect yourself from bad stuff that could be coming to your Western country, the reality is you might want to run from something at first. But I'm going to tell you all the things that I've decided to run to and how my life is better from being diversified. We're going to totally end this idea that there's nowhere to go, because that's complete garbage. So for me, Go Where You're Treated Best is about reading the tea leaves and seeing the direction the world is going. When someone said giving up your citizenship is a very bad idea, in his opinion, my answer is, that's great. You shouldn't give up your US citizenship. I make decisions that work for me, and when you look at the services Nomad Capitalist provides, it's not, hey, go do what Andrew did. It's, let's take the principles that Andrew and the company talks about and help people apply those in their own lives. So when someone says dangerous things may come without having US citizenship, I look at this statistic. The average age of empires, according to specialists, is 250 years. After that, empires generally die, often slowly, but overwhelmingly from overreach in the search for power. The America of 1776 will reach its 250th year in 2026. It is upon us. Now, I'm not rooting for the decline of anything, but we have to live in reality. And what I've been hearing in my family for 30 years is that the US and a number of other Western countries are heading in the wrong direction. And some of the stuff that we talked about around the kitchen table when I was a teenager is now coming to pass. The election of Donald Trump, Brexit, some of the riots and civil unrest and people complaining about they're not getting ahead. And that's come at some ways at the benefit of other countries around the world that weren't in great shape when I was a teenager, having those conversations around the kitchen table. Some of the countries that are now very livable around the world were actually not very livable back then. And so if we look at the fact that there are 254 countries and sovereign territories, now, the Cayman Islands is on its own country, but they basically run their own affairs. Basically, one's empire could collapse every year and you would basically just go in a cycle. The nomad in Nomad Capitalist doesn't mean that you personally should be constantly moving. I've done that because I enjoy seeing the lifestyle and all the opportunities that are all around the world. I'll go to Colombia, I'll go to Malaysia, I'll go to Mexico, I'll go to Ireland, I'll go to Eastern Europe, I'll even go sometimes to Africa, and I'll see, wow, there's so much opportunity. There's something great in every place. I'm going to come back to why that's important in a minute. But if you just want to live your Nomad Capitalist life by saying, I'm going to go and live in one place, you're not violating the nomad. The nomad part is 254 countries and sovereign territories 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 250 years ago. The playing field was different. When the US was at its heyday, there were countries that were in total malaise. Argentina in 1900 was one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Now, I would still argue it's a rather livable country. It's not the worst place to live. There is economic chaos, but if you had independent wealth, as Doug Casey has said, you could live very well in Argentina. You just need to not to be from there. It's still not the worst place even if you're from there, but obviously it's nowhere near one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Within my lifetime, Venezuela was a place attracting people. People were going from European countries to live in Venezuela. There are Venezuelan citizens who are recent descendants of Italians and Germans and people from Western European countries. Well, now they're Venezuelans and now they have the restrictions of being Venezuelans. Things changed relatively quickly. In 1700, India was the richest country. At one point, China was the richest country. The UK was, if not the richest, they say among the richest. Then the United States came into the picture. And so, yes, it's true. The UK is still one of the wealthier countries in the world. China has, in some ways, had a rebound. People are questioning what will happen next. India, there's a lot of reasons why. There's some great books that I've read on that and what happened in India and some of the influences that took away their status as like 25% at one point, I think, of the world's economy. It was huge. Places rise and places fall. Countries don't always play fair. And we see that with the stuff that we do here at Nomad Capitalist. You can get citizenship by investment in a peaceful country where you can just go and live, and if you have some money, you'll have a very nice life. And this year versus last year, there's a few more boxes that you have to tick. It takes a little bit longer because the big Western powers don't like the fact that, in my opinion, their empires are slowing down. Slowly, not overwhelmingly. I think when people say, oh, you think the US is going to collapse, I don't hope the US collapses. I don't think it's going to collapse. What I think the ultimate world would be is one with a bit more equilibrium, where everybody has the chance to get ahead in every country around the world. Nobody gets to get too far ahead just by sitting around. The idea that the United States of the 70s, the 80s, that you'd have one person with no college education having a job so great they bought a 5-bedroom house in the suburbs and you went on vacations and everything else, while people in other countries, there just weren't many opportunities. I'm glad, yes, I'm glad there's a bit more equilibrium. I don't have this nostalgia for my people just because I was born in the US. I like to go to Malaysia and see that they're doing better than they were 30 years ago. I like to go to Colombia and see that not only are they doing better, but things are more peaceful than they were 30 years ago. And it may be hard for people who are sitting in a Western country who were told their entire lives that we're the best, and now it bothers them to hear, hey, you know what? People are going to Colombia. It's actually not that bad. But the reality is, U.S. citizenship, in my opinion, is much less valuable. The idea that they're going to come and evacuate you in a helicopter from the top of the embassy in Vietnam, it doesn't work anymore. And we saw that during the pandemic. A lot of people were stuck. We see that the United States, compared to some of, let's say, the Northern European countries, when their citizens are stuck somewhere, yeah, they make some efforts. Maybe they make some token efforts. Sometimes they don't. But your citizenship doesn't really get you much. Citizenship these days, in a time when the Western powers are increasingly being challenged, whether it's BRICS, whether it's, China, whatever you want to call it. Lots of different countries are coming up that you don't hear about in the West. And it's just marginal transfers of power from the West to each one's taking their own little slice. And the pushback is, hey, your citizenship is an obligation. You're seeing more Western countries say, why don't people who live overseas as our citizens pay taxes? Well, because they don't live here. They don't use the roads. They don't use the schools. They don't use the fire services, the police. Well, no. The governments of the West are angry. They want to make citizenship an obligation. So for me, these are the kinds of things that a crumbling, slowly perhaps, empire does when they realize that there's marginal losses of power. And just look back in the US at the global financial crisis, the percentage of people who own their own home in this total home catastrophe, real estate collapse, it was only several percentage points of people that reduced homeownership. And look at what happened. Right? People think in the Great Depression, 100% of people were unemployed. At the very worst, it was like 25 or 26%. 3 out of 4 people had a job. Everything is at the margins. And so you're seeing marginal transfers of power away from the West. Their empires are crumbling. But if we look at 254 countries and sovereign territories, there will always be some place in the way up. Again, one could fall every year and one goes in a circle. If we imagine that they go in a circle. Now, some countries have never been great, but if you go and look, there was immense wealth in African countries at some points, throughout history. Maybe very concentrated in certain hands in some of these countries around the world, but there is wealth in all places around the world. And I think what you're seeing now is countries in places like Africa are saying, well, wait a second, we're still kind of under your system, France, with the way you run our monetary system, or hey, we still feel we're too beholden to the US and now we want to go play with China. And you're just seeing more power. Do you not think one country a year will come up and say, hey, we want freedom? I've seen it with my own eyes because I've spent a lot of time in countries that in your lifetime were communist, were authoritarian, and now it's like people who were born, some of them work for us. They don't even understand what that's about. They live very nice lives. They live very happy and prosperous lives that their parents, you don't know how bad we had it. We were sharing a can of tuna fish in the family in the 1990s, and you were born in 2000, and now it's amazing. They may not be as wealthy as the average American, but they're doing much better. And so if you look at just some of the countries that have come up, while in the economic freedom rankings, places like the US have fallen, it supports my view that empires rise and fall. And so the goal is to find these places before they're cool. Carl Squire says, by the time you realize that it's time to move, so will everyone else, and that will be too late to go anywhere. So good luck with that, coward. Please. Coward was my grandfather's name. And so you want to find the places before they're cool. And so when people say, well, if you have the so-called billionaire clients and you're telling them about Malaysia and Mexico, yeah, Now, a very small number of the clients are billionaires. We help people who have as little as $1 million in liquid net worth. You can go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply and learn how we help people provide the most, and I think the only, holistic service for total international planning, from taxes to residence to citizenship, to asset protection, to lifestyle, to real estate. We have all the people under one roof. And so I talk about these quote unquote weird places because guess what? One of the places that's not an empire, and good for them for not being one, but a little bit before my time that was a backwater was Singapore. Another was South Korea. 40 years ago, you're going to Singapore, this guy's an idiot. Who's laughing now? And now you can't go. He is right in one thing. If you don't have millions of dollars and you're not willing to really commit to living in Singapore, they don't need you to go there. They're like, yeah, we're going to be very particular because a lot of people want to come here. It is harder to get into Singapore than it is to get into the US. And so we help plenty of people move to Switzerland, move to Ireland for tax friendliness in those countries. We help people move to the UAE. Very few people, even the wealthiest clients, when they look at the requirements for Singapore in terms of both money and the time commitment, very few of them do that, but they're interested in it. We have people who own property in Singapore. But they're also looking for, hey, what are the places that could do well? You can laugh all you want at Mexico. Their currency is appreciated. I was on CBS News a couple months ago talking about why the Mexican peso has done so well at a time when a lot of currencies haven't done well against the US dollar. They are dominating in manufacturing and taking away marginal business from China. And I think if I had to have a child today, I'd rather they be Mexican looking forward than American. I think the US will increasingly crumble and be nasty, and I think Mexico will offer more opportunities. I'm not saying they should go and live in Mexico and get a normal job, but I'm saying if I had to choose a citizenship for them, that's what I would choose. And so yes, successful people do want to know weird places because those are exactly the ones that you need to figure out. And as to leaving once it's too late, let me tell you a story about why I left early. It's not just about what I talked about as a kid and seeing the writing on the wall and realizing that taxes were going to go up and why would I give so much of my money to a government to get so little in return? Because really they don't value me that much. They're not going to protect me. They don't care about me. In fact, they probably protect me less than the country that doesn't take very much in taxes, where it's a small country and their job is to protect their citizens, not go and start wars around the world. But I'll tell you a story. One of my first trips, going back like 17 years now, I took a trip to Europe and I met a girl. And this particular girl was from China. And almost instantly, we got along and we started talking about business, and she liked my sense of humor, and we just had a great conversation. This was at a time when I was in the US, I was starting a business, I was young. It wasn't really cool to start a business way back then in the 2000s. And, I'm a young guy, I'm probably way too intense. Didn't really find a lot of girls who found that interesting where I lived. And here's this girl, I'm like, wow, this is different. I said, oh yeah, but I have a business. And that's kind of weird. She's like, where I'm from, yeah, you're 50 and you start a business. That's pretty remarkable. That's pretty cool. It's like, oh, this is interesting. And we ended up, spending some time together. And it kind of turned me on to this idea in real life of, yeah, people are different. People have different cultures. People have different interests. What is interesting to me that may not be interesting to the people where I'm from is of value to people all around the world. This girl lives in New York City now. I don't think she needed me for anything, but we just shared something. And so when people say, well, what are you running from? I do think, yes, I've been, my entire life have been talking about, hey, the US and other Western countries aren't going to be the answer. But really, for me, it's become an issue of what are you running to? When my wife and I have a fight, she's like, I'm going to sleep on the couch. And so if I look back at, the years of traveling the world, yes, it was so terrible meeting the leggy blondes and the brunettes who at 24 years old listen to Tchaikovsky and read books and kind of geopolitical conversations. And on a couple occasions, my parents would meet these girls and say, oh my goodness, we know 24-year-old girls in the United States, they're still playing with unicorns. What is this? What a terrible life that I ran to, where you can talk to young, beautiful people who enjoy going to the opera and have culture and have intelligence and who know what's happening in the world and who have different opinions. Perhaps I didn't run from something, I actually ran to something. I think we should acknowledge, and I'm happy to help And we make these episodes to help you and to open your eyes. And I meet people all around the world to say, thanks, like you've opened my eyes to not just lowering my taxes, but I'm at the level of my life in some other country, or I realized my country wasn't there for me. But the people who want to say there's nowhere to run, what am I running from at this point? Everything good in my life is outside of where I'm from. Everything that made me who I am. It's not that I went to US schools. It's that I learned from people who have a global view. Most of my money at this point has been made outside of the United States. And so the people who don't agree with that, in my opinion, need to be patriotic. They need to stay and fight because they have nothing else. And what I think people don't like is that the world's competitive. This sort of Archie Bunker philosophy of the world's passing me by. Other places are competitive. Other people have opportunities, not just me. And it's harder to compete. I think it's a good thing because I don't think just the people where I'm from deserve to get ahead. But when I started traveling, I discovered that Asia actually has growth. People in Asia actually want to work. They believe in hard work. There's a lot of good stuff happening there. I said, wow, this is a great, I want to be part of this. I discovered that people from Malaysia to Colombia and even people in Ireland are very nice. None of them want to bother you nearly as much as people in the United States do, and certainly not the US government. I'm not saying governments around the world are perfect. Sure, some governments, they all want to bother you to some extent, but some of them don't have much power to. And some of them, they're just small countries. They just don't really have that much desire. They really spend much more of their time serving their citizens. Hard to believe if you live in an empire that's crumbling. But it actually is the case. Imagine not every place in the world is like your country. And imagine, yes, maybe there's some downsides in certain places, but we're not talking about moving to Chad. There's plenty of countries where they have plenty of the good stuff your country has, but none of the bad stuff, or very little of it. And so I discovered people are much nicer. And I also discovered that this idea that we're going to vote for Trump, or we're going to vote for Pierre, or we're going to vote for, in the UK, well, I got nothing there. And that somehow that's going to save us. That's the ticket. Don't move. Just make sure you vote harder for the right people. Okay, so Trump gets in for 4 more years, then what? Then the next guy comes and undoes it. This is the swinging pendulum. And so the idea that you're going to stay in your country and rely exclusively focused on a place that, let's be honest, it doesn't care about you. If you live in an empire, they don't care about you. Their goal is not you and your happiness. Just look at some of the statistics in the US. Healthcare in some counties is worse than that in Yemen. Who's working on that? Nobody. And people on both sides said that we should start taking care of our US citizens. Maybe make sure that every single one of your citizens has better health care by the numbers. Nobody's just feeling and touching this. It's by the numbers worse than Yemen. So maybe the place isn't as good as you think. But one other commenter said, this is the problem with the richies. Oh, thank you. You think you can outrun this. The controllers, those nasty controllers, are taking it all, including all of yours. I'm not sure what all they're taking. So you're either one of them or you'll be robbed, subjugated, ended. Wake the F up. So on this, let me just tell you, if your country is so incredible, and this shouldn't have to be said, but if it's so incredible and you can't figure out how to make $1,000 a month to get a residence permit in Ecuador, if you live in the greatest country in the history of the world, you might as well stay there and fight for what's yours. And you can't figure out how to buy a plane ticket to go somewhere in some other country, Ecuador just being a stand-in for any number of other countries that would let you in, then that's fine. You can sit at home under your blanket saying that there's no way to escape the World Economic Forum or whatever boogeyman that you have. And listen, there are concerns, no doubt about it. Some people take it too far with everything being a conspiracy theory. No doubt there's bad stuff happening in the world. People who thought some pretty basic stuff were called conspiracy theorists 10 years ago. I will be building my business overseas. I will be enjoying my life. I will be diversified. Not just because I feel I have to be, because that's what I want to do. And when bad stuff happens, I will be moving more freely, spending more freely, building more freely, and impacting more people than you sitting under your blanket in your basement. You wake up. The problem isn't that only the richies are leaving. This is the most democratized thing you can do these days. Anyone can live in 3 different countries. If you can buy a few plane tickets, there's remote jobs. You can build a business online. There's a lot of things that you can do these days that, again, didn't exist 20 or 30 years ago. That's part of why you see people in countries where we have clients from That, yeah, they're like, hey, I figured out in Egypt how to build $1 million business. Well, what's your excuse then? You don't even have to be that rich. So the reality is, when you go out into the world, there's no other way to see it. I can tell you all I want about it, and you can agree with me. But until you go out and see some of the places that we're talking about, you're really not going to understand how there truly are places that are going to be different. And the nomad part is that 30 years from now, you may decide to go somewhere else. The place that works today may not be the best place 30 years from now. That's the nomad, is never thinking, we're here, it's over, we're never going anywhere again. Because your ancestors didn't think that. They moved from somewhere, and you think that they're heroes. You think they made the right decision. Well, I've talked to a lot of people who've come from countries in Eastern Europe in particular saying, I left when things were authoritarian and there were no opportunities. I actually think now that country's better, and I'm thinking about going back. So this is what Nomad Capitalist does for people, because I live it. I would be living it whether I had a business or not. So every time I ask myself, should I be in business? I say, well, I'd be doing this stuff. I might as well have an impact, and I might as well make some money. Nomadcapitalist.com/apply is where you learn about our services. It's built around what I've actually done. What I've actually done isn't what you should do. You might have 4 kids that I don't, and your plan's gonna be different. You might have less desire to move around during the years. You might have any number of different things, and we adapt to what you want. Everyone just doesn't get like, oh, here, do what Andrew's plan is. You get your own plan. It's the most customized planning service in this entire industry because we have hundreds of different options that we can offer you, not just 1 or 3 or 5 that we try and jam down your throat. And it's holistic. You want to have a combination of all the different things that you have in your home country, and you want to do it somewhere else. I probably can't help you find the love of your life on a cruise ship in Norway or somewhere in Colombia, but we can help point you in the right direction to have the better life that I found because I realized there were problems and I wanted to see what the rest of the world had to offer.